Hi, here we are in Illustrator again. In this video, we are going to cover the basic shapes. So we'll cover rectangles and ellipses. Then we'll cover more shapes in future videos. So here is the document that I created in the last video. I'm just going to get rid of this first rectangle that I drew, and now I'm going to draw some different ones. I'm going to go to one column for my tool panel. I will choose the rectangle tool, and when I do that, I can just click and drag and I create a rectangle. So I can do that from any corner. So top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. So I'm just clicking and dragging from a corner to create my rectangle. Right now, they are just set to be the colors that I have here in my color swatches. We'll talk about the colors in just a little while. I'm going to actually change the colors right now just so that my shapes now are a little bit more visible to you. But again, we'll talk about colors more in depth in a little bit. So when I am drawing I'm just going to get rid of all these shapes that I just drew. But when I'm drawing again, I'm going to change the color too, just so it's a little bit more visible. Okay, so when I am drawing my shapes, I drew previously from a corner, so click and drag from a corner. Another option is to hold down the Alt key and click and drag out, and that draws a shape from the center. So sometimes that's useful. If I want to constrain their proportions so that I draw a rectangle that is a perfect square, for example, I can click and drag while holding the Shift key, and that constrains the proportions. So now I have a perfect square. If I wanted to, I can press and hold the Shift key as well as the Alt key, and I will create a perfect square from the center. So all of those options work the same way for my ellipse tool. So I just chose the ellipse tool, which is nested under the rectangle tool, so in with all the other shape tools. So I can just click and drag and create an ellipse. I can click and drag while holding the Shift key, and that creates a perfect circle. I could press and hold the Alt key while clicking and dragging, and I create a shape from the center. If I press and hold both the Alt and Option key while clicking and dragging, then I create a perfect circle from the center. If I am creating a shape and I don't like the placement of it, and I haven't finished creating the shape yet, I want to move it while I'm in the middle of making that shape, I can press and hold the space bar and move that shape around. So we've seen that other places too. We will use that in Photoshop a little bit. But again, press and hold the space bar while you are drawing a shape in order to move it, and then I'm going to release my space bar and continue to draw that shape. So I have held down my mouse button the entire time, press and hold the space bar, move it around, move my shape until I get it the right size and shape that I want, and then release the mouse button. I'm just going to get rid of all of these shapes for now to clear my workspace, clear some of the clutter. I can also create a shape just by choosing my shape tool and then clicking once somewhere. I could click on my white area, which is my artboard, or I could click on this gray area, which is sort of just off the artboard. That's one of the nice things about Illustrator, is that I can work on this white space or my artboard, or I can work off of it. Photoshop doesn't allow us that option. But anyway, back to what I was saying is I can use my shape tool, whatever shape tool I want. So I'll use my ellipse tool, click once, and I can tell it what size I want that shape to be. So maybe I want a circle that is 3 inches in both height and width. And so I type in 3 inches right there, and perfect. So maybe I want a rectangle that is 2 inches in both height and width. And I can type that in there. Another thing I can do pretty simply and easily is I can rotate an object. So I have my selection tool, and now I'm just moving my selection so that my cursor is just to the outside of one of the corners of my shape. And notice my cursor changes to that curved cursor, and now I can rotate that shape around to whatever angle I want. If I want to constrain those angles to every 45 degrees, I can press and hold the Shift button on my keyboard as I rotate that. So it only allows me to rotate every 45 degrees when I do that. Likewise, while I have my selection tool selected, I could also move my object. So if I want to move something, I can just click on it to select it and then move it around wherever I want to move it. I can also resize it. So if I want to, I can just click and drag from a corner just to resize it. Or if I want to constrain the proportions, again, I would press and hold the Shift key while I resize it. One other kind of little detail about creating rectangles. So as you can see in this rectangle that I've already created, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I have these widgets in the corners, and they're kind of hard to see, but you'll know them once you realize what they are. But they're a little built-in widget that I can use to round the corners of my rectangle. So notice as I click and drag in that circle towards the center, I'm rounding all of those corners. So again, if I made a new rectangle, I would have those same options kind of just built in. So I can round all the corners, or I can round corners individually. Again, we'll talk about that more later, but I want you to be aware that that is there for your use. Okay, that is the basics of rectangles and circles. We'll talk about the next objects in the next video.